Welcome to Bad Elizabeth. I'm your host, Gideon Evans.
And I'm your host, Kathy Egan-Taylor. The premise of this show is exactly what it sounds like. Each episode, we profile a different Elizabeth, or derivation of that name.
Like Lilibet.
Or Sabella.
Or Elisheba.
Who deserves to be called bad.
And these bad Elizabeths come from every station in life, from low to royal.
It's good to be the queen.
That's our producer and engineer, Will Becton of Jett Road Studios.
Hi, guys.
Our episode today is about Queen Elizabeth I. Sound the trumpets. Hey, it's another episode of Bad Elizabeth. I'm Gideon Evans.
And I am Kathy Egan-Taylor. And also joining us is Will Becton.
Howdy.
Hello, Will.
This is a really daunting episode.
This is a bit of a bear, I would say.
Our Elizabeth today is Elizabeth I, not the second Elizabeth. Don't confuse the two.
Very different.
I think we should start with a disclaimer, just saying that neither of us are like royal experts.
No.
We're going to get stuff wrong. Luckily, all these people have been dead for centuries and we won't get sued.
I don't think so.
We might get haunted.
But it kind of would be fun if that was your biggest problem, is that she would be haunting you.
Right. So we can dive right in. Elizabeth I. Look, I mean, kings do bad things, kings and queens, all the time. It's almost part of the job. And I think those things sometimes get overlooked because it is part of the job, right?
I would agree.
Elizabeth, like other monarchs, did some pretty horrible things. But I think before we get into the bad stuff she did, let's talk about when she was alive. It just wasn't an easy time to be alive, no matter who you were, especially for women, especially for a queen. You know, you'd think a queen has everything, but we're looking at like the 16th century. So she was born in 1533. The Inquisition was going on. There were all these diseases. I think the plague was
various plagues, various
big.
diseases.
There was a disease they called the sweating disease, which turned out to be hantavirus, which was the virus that killed
Gene Hackman's wife.
Right, and it's like born by mice or
Well,
rats.
it's basically rat excrement.
And I think the Black Plague came from
Also
rats.
from that excrement,
Because
yeah.
people were just like throwing trash on the floor.
Well, sewage was in the street.
Yeah, there were like chamber pots.
For sanitation, it wasn't a good time.
No. Apart from looking at how hard it was to be alive, just generally, like people who think they have rough childhoods, she had a really rough childhood because her dad was King Henry VIII, and people might know him from those paintings where he's like this fat guy with like a turkey leg. Hans Holbein was the painter.
Yes.
And he's a big dickwad.
Well, Henry VIII, when you think of him, he's synonymous with the word with gluttony.
Gluttony and just like cruelty
Yes.
to especially his wives.
Yeah. He was like the 7 deadly sins all in one guy.
Pretty much. But gluttony was a big one.
It was a big one.
Also, he killed 2 of his wives, I think at least 2. And the first that he killed was Anne Boleyn. And then he killed another wife, Catherine Howard, because I think she said she was a virgin and then she wasn't a virgin. And this is royalty who's acting this way. So think about what it's like if you're not royalty.
Well, I mean, it's at a time when the class stratification was very distinct. There were the haves and the have-nots.
Totally.
The other thing about Henry VIII, he strayed from the Catholic Church because he wanted to have a divorce.
He didn't like a lot of his wives. And when he wanted a divorce, the Pope, who had tons of power, didn't recognize divorce. And I think that kind of got the ball rolling with the Reformation. Catholicism and Protestantism, there were all these Protestant sects
Exactly.
that split off. You know, there was a lot of hate and hostility between Protestants and Catholics.
Exactly.
And there's constant threat of war between like England and France and Spain is
yeah.
like Catholic, but England now is Protestant. But anyway, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, was this notorious character where she was, you know, seen as like this woman that slept around a lot, and she kind of cheated on Henry and then did some things that betrayed him. And she, just had a terrible reputation at the time. And in fact, the public in England called her the Great Whore or something like that. And then when Elizabeth was born, she was known as the Little Whore. Can you imagine being born and already having that nickname?
No. We also have to say when she was killed, when he had her killed, she was beheaded.
Yes, that was a big thing.
That was kind of an ugly way to go.
Most of the stuff in England with the royalty, it seems like was hanging, but then what they also did as part of the hanging was they disembowel you while they hung you. They'd just cut your stomach open.
And it was public.
And then they'd swing, they'd kind of cut your head off too. And then they could put your head at the top of a post.
Didn't they do that to Ceausescu?
I think you're
And
right.
maybe Mussolini too.
They were a husband and wife Ceausescu,
yes, they were kind of publicly executed and flailed in the street and paraded around.
A little bit of a human pinata.
Exactly.
Totally. And it's like a scare tactic of like, here's what could happen to you. And we're talking a lot these days about like what a civil society does and doesn't do and what a democracy doesn't do and where, you have to have the rule of law. And I think it's safe to say if you're like beheading people and putting heads on stakes, you're kind of straying.
You're not setting a good example for humanity and the kind of society you want to perpetuate.
Yeah, that's a Handmaid's Tale.
Exactly.
Symbiology.
But it's also a good way of keeping the kids in line.
Right. So the odds were stacked against Elizabeth in terms of becoming like another monarch down the line because she was stained by
her mother's
the
reputation. Yeah.
And also, she wasn't necessarily the next one in line. Everybody's always wondering if one of these wives will have a son, because the son would always become the king.
The natural heir to the throne.
Who became kind of like a competitor. Mary was potentially in the line of succession. There was also Edward was in the line of succession, and then Elizabeth was too. And I think when you're competing as potential heirs, they see you as a threat. So Edward VI was the son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, and not the one that played Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
That would have been impossible.
So Edward VI became the king after Henry died, but he was like 9 years old, and that was going to be a problem because they were trying to marry him off, but who wants to marry a 9-year-old, right?
Well, some people.
I guess.
Unfortunately.
A weird crowd.
Probably in that time, too, especially if they're going to potentially be a king.
Yeah. Like, I could make it work. He's only 9, but I can make it work.
And I think a lot of these royals they were very inbred.
Very incestuous, very inbred.
And that caused like a lot of hereditary diseases.
And homeliness.
A lot of that. And Edward kind of died even before, like he was only alive a few years.
Yeah, after he became king.
Right. And when Edward was king, it was really all the aides that were in power.
Of course.
So it was a weird time. Then Mary became queen, and she was really paranoid about Elizabeth. She was nicknamed Bloody Mary, and she was really Catholic, actually. And I think because the Catholics and the Protestants hated each other so much, the Protestants saw Elizabeth as like the hope for Protestants and didn't like Mary. And Mary saw that Elizabeth was a big threat. So Mary basically imprisoned Elizabeth. So this is all happening before she became queen. Her mom was beheaded. Her sister imprisoned her. Yeah, they're royals, but that's not easy,
You're
right?
talking about Elizabeth before she was queen. Mary imprisoned her. Her mother was beheaded.
Yeah, Elizabeth lived a rough life,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
I think it's fair to say, even though she was kind of like a royal.
So is Bloody Mary, is that where Bloody Mary comes from?
It must, right? I would think so.
Well, yeah, and Bloody Mary was also, I think, sort of a nursery rhyme, like you say, Bloody Mary 3 times or something like that.
And there was also a character in the South Pacific named Bloody Mary.
Oh, interesting. So it's part of like folklore.
Yeah.
Whatever, Bloody Mary is not a good thing.
It is.
Unless it comes with vodka.
And she was really mean and horrible, and she like killed a lot of people and was not nice to Elizabeth. But there were a lot of coups that were planned against Mary, and Mary kept thinking maybe Elizabeth was behind it so she could become queen, but there was no proof, so they never killed Elizabeth. But it's not easy for either of them to like feel like the other one's a big threat.
No, not at all.
And, everybody's expecting Mary to have a baby, so that could become the king, especially if it's a son.
Hopefully it's a son. She bears a son.
And the book I read was The First Elizabeth by Carol Lee Erickson. They kept using the word baron to describe Mary. I don't know if people use that term
I would
anymore.
still say that. I mean, it's a polite, traditional way of saying. Is it
polite? It seems kind of like.
Well, it means infertile.
I think infertile might.
Well, I think you use
nicer.
barren, you're talking about soil often.
But barren sounds like hopeless.
Yeah, well, barren, I think if like the soil's barren, it's useless.
Right.
So, it is a bit of a derogatory term.
I wasn't sure because the book was probably written like 2 decades ago. So it's like, I wonder if people don't say that anymore.
Well, I'm barren.
Well.
You didn't have anti-barren treatments?
Well, I'm 77, so I'm not going to be.
Right.
That's why I'm
medicine
barren.
Today with Elizabeth Holmes, you never know.
I want to keep my figure.
Right. Mary could not have a kid, and she was also very sickly. So people did think she probably was going to end up like dropping dead at some point. And she did die ultimately. And Elizabeth became queen, and that gave a lot of the Protestants hope.
And you said like all this time she still had access to a good education.
Yeah,
and
she was a smart
They said
kid.
she was smart. So like, she was not just because she was part of the royal family. She actually was like, they educated her. They're like, yeah, we could groom her for the throne.
Totally. And even when she became queen, as you can imagine, there were some people that just felt that women leaders, that was just like an unnatural thing under God. So even becoming queen, even among her people, the Protestants, they were just like, she shouldn't be queen. And she was also very had opinions and stuff and was very forward. And that kind of rubbed people the wrong way. They just didn't think women should act that way. And she was attractive, but she had big teeth, apparently. I don't know why they mentioned it in the book, but she did.
But they were her teeth.
That little factoid survived like 500 years or something.
I guess. Maybe they found the teeth.
Well, also the thing you think about is I remember that Simpsons reference, the big book of British teeth. And you can't even imagine what dentistry was like back then.
And you throw in some inbredness and...
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so Elizabeth is queen, and I think she's a little sickly too, and people aren't sure she's going to kind of survive. But instantly everybody's kind of like, will she get married? That seems to be what happens to you if you're a royal, especially a woman, that they're like, let's get her married.
Well, it's also a political thing because they're like, we need her to marry someone from, their political allies. Yeah. Someone who's a Protestant from Spain or someone from Portugal or someone from Sweden.
They do it with Catholics too. And it was all for convenience. It was transactional.
Exactly.
So that's going on. She doesn't necessarily have any interest in getting married. And she's kind of growing into this queen thing. Somebody described her as a strange sort of woman. What was that book, Lean In?
Sheryl Sandberg?
Sandberg. And she was kind of that type of character. She really was an extrovert, and she'd kind of learned how to manipulate the people she talked to. She lied a lot, and people said she gave orders absolutely. So she looked like she might be a strong leader.
Monarch, yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of cool. And I think that's kind of how she ended up with a big reputation. She grew into this job of being essentially a dictator. And she couldn't get hooked up with anybody. People wanted her to marry, to have a kid, to have a son, also to have a heir to the throne. And she ended up, it might have been much later, but she ended up with this nickname, the Virgin Queen.
Correct.
But she really wasn't a virgin. It was just the story behind her, probably because she never married.
Kind of like Britney Spears for a while, right?
Right. Well, who's that quarterback? Steve Young. He really was a virgin until he got married because he was a Mormon.
Oh, wow.
Well, there might be some stories out there.
But she really was apparently pretty promiscuous. And there was a guy named Robert Dudley. Now we're getting into some of the bad stuff she did.
Okay.
There's a guy named Robert Dudley who was a handsome guy. He was their horsemaster.
Oh.
And he was this handsome, strapping horsemaster guy. And she was not shy about flirting with him in public. She kind of tickled him and everybody could see it. And, people thought it was super inappropriate. She denied that she had a sexual relationship with him, but it was pretty clear she did. Like, I think he might have visited her at night.
And there's also lots of opportunities to steal away in the stables.
Totally. It sounds like a porn, sort of like if they made porn in the Elizabethan era.
I think that's the whole plot in Prince's Raspberry Beret video.
Oh, I don't know that one.
Old Man Johnson's farm.
Raspberry Beret.
Yeah,
I see.
Things went down in the barn. That's all I'm saying.
Roll in the hay.
Roll in the hay, exactly.
You know, again, another positive thing, just a side note, she was very big supporter of the arts, and Shakespeare performed for her, and that was a big thing. So, like, we'll give her credit for that. With Robert Dudley, he was a married man. I mean, that's fucked up a little bit. Maybe that alone wouldn't be enough to get you on this podcast. And also, is that really like Elizabeth's
problem?
Maybe that was his problem, that he was...
I would have to say that if the man strays, it's the man's problem.
Right. So you don't fault her for going for a married guy.
I don't.
Okay. So what happened with Dudley is people start twittering about, will Dudley become the king, essentially, if they marry? And then Dudley's wife one day is found at the bottom of stairs with a broken neck and dead. It didn't look good. And people were saying maybe Dudley killed her and Elizabeth was in on the plot.
Well, the other thing, too, is you imagine the outfits that women wore.
Yeah.
Are always tricky on stairs.
That's true. Good point.
You know, a staircase, well, there's that famous book and movie and case called The Staircase.
Oh, right.
So people fall down staircases all the time.
Stairs are very dangerous.
The only group I follow, like on Instagram and on Facebook, is called Deadly Staircases.
Oh, is that right?
Just
right. I remember
publish
that.
Deadly staircases and like, wow, that could kill you. They're not ones where people actually met their fate.
Oh, right. They don't have like a body count. Like
there's
the
no body
It's
count.
just so appalling to look at the design of the stairs.
That's what I like.
That you're like, people will die if they try to go down them.
So it's fun. It's a fun distraction.
And in the book that I kind of examined for this episode, apparently there was some research done, and Dudley's wife might have had cancer. And so they were saying she might have been very weak. You know, she might have fallen on her own.
All right, so let's just say she fell down the staircase.
Yeah, so the Dudley thing we're putting aside, basically.
Yeah.
Now, what did end up happening, there were like these uprisings within England and in other countries where there were like these Catholic sects that were like super religious. Like if you became a priest, like a Catholic priest in parts of England, you were almost expected to become a martyr so that you would become like a saint.
You're going to be strapped to the side of a cliff where buzzards eat your liver, or you're going to be crucified or something like that. There's going to be a violent end that comes to it in the name of the Catholic Church.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like a kamikaze pilot.
It's also like, you know, in the Middle East with the suicide bombers.
Exactly.
Right. You're famous in your community because you like sacrificed yourself.
But it's your commitment. It's your purpose in life.
It's your commitment. And I think Elizabeth at certain times as like this Protestant queen, she was scared. And there were cases where like people were trying to poison her and there were like talks of coups. So she went ahead and kind of terrorized certain towns. You know, she did end up killing a lot of like Catholic priests and like just people she thought were traitors. She would like hang them. And like there was one case where she hung like something like 8 priests at one time. I think in total she probably killed like 250 Catholic priests.
Oh my God.
And there was one thing where a Catholic priest, they were hanging them, but they put the rope around his chin instead of his throat. And so when they finished disemboweling him and hanging him, he wasn't dead. And he stood up and people were like, it's a miracle, you know, and then they killed him. But it kind of gave the Catholics hope. They were like, that was a message from God.
There was some sort of divine intervention
Something
going
like
on.
That.
A message from beyond almost.
Totally.
Instead of a flub of an execution.
Yeah. I mean, I think if these people really wanted to depose her and were a physical threat to her, can we blame her for wanting to kill them?
I mean, when your back's against the wall, at a time when people are disposable.
Yeah.
At this point, she knows who her enemies are, and they're willing to like self-emulsify or something like
emulate.
Or emulate.
Emulate.
What is it? What is it when you light yourself on fire?
I think it's a weird sounding term because it sounds a lot like emulate, but it's immolate or something.
Yeah.
Well, let's just say people were willing to sacrifice their physical being, their bodies, like a suicide bomber, as we said. If you're willing to do that, you're willing to do anything.
Were all these killings, so it wasn't like send somebody with a silencer to eliminate somebody. These were all public.
Very public, right?
Yeah, people would go to these hangings and they'd come with buckets to put the blood of the dead in the buckets. It was like a souvenir.
Oh, God.
Again, we don't have any videos of this. We have to imagine that.
We have etchings.
Yes, exactly. We have to imagine that, like, there were people swept up in this that were just, like, innocent people. Like, they would make it illegal to go to Mass.
Often people would meet in caves and, like, just to have communion.
So it's illegal to go to Mass?
It became illegal.
Was this when the Church of England started?
Separated, yes.
Yeah, exactly. This is all a result of that.
Henry VIII.
And the Inquisition, as we all remember, History of the World Part 1.
Mm-hmm. The Inquisition.
Exactly.
What a show.
So that was a great music, but it was also not a fun time.
No.
So they were pretty nasty to the Protestants, and the Protestants were pretty nasty to the Catholics. But I do think it's fine to say there was probably some killings that she did that weren't too cool.
Oh, I think there was a lot of killings that she was proudly behind. But as the Queen of England, that was her job.
Yeah.
250.
But that was just priests. I mean, the people she killed was in the thousands, I'm sure.
This area of England's uprising, go stop it.
Yeah, let's stop this. Let's put the fear of God into them. So this was super stressful. And then there was also another kind of sister of Elizabeth, Mary Stuart, was a Catholic, became kind of the Queen of Scotland.
Mary, Queen of Scots.
Yeah, so I think she also became a big threat to Elizabeth because the Catholic Church didn't really recognize Elizabeth and they ended up excommunicating her. So Elizabeth was always like, should I kill Mary Stuart? But Elizabeth, with all the stress, as we can all imagine, became kind of nasty to work with. Just not nice to the people who were there to help her.
You also mentioned, like, because she was number one target, every monarch always had a taster to taste and make sure their food wasn't poisoned. So can you imagine just trying to get dressed in the day, eat a meal, and you've got 11 people around you, dressing you, making sure that there's no poison in your underwear, no poison in your soup.
Yeah, the underwear was, you had to find out where everything came from.
Exactly. So it was like she lived in a highly controlled situation from the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, and even her most personal moments, getting dressed in the morning to just feeding herself. She has a team of people making sure that she stays alive, which is probably not fun.
Yeah, and she could take out her frustrations on her staff.
So paranoia seems like it's got to be a pretty massive factor in all this stuff, right?
I think there's extreme paranoia going on. So there's that. Number one, sets the tone. Plus, you have a team of people around you all the time making sure that you remain alive, but also you want to live your life. She wants to have a little bit of fun. Obviously, she's a fan of the arts. She saw Shakespeare perform. She wants to have a glass of wine at dinner. Like, back off. Let me enjoy life as the queen,
She did, finally have a relationship with a guy that was actually Catholic. And then she had a problem with the Puritans in her country who were Protestant, but they were kind of crazy.
So this is like leading up to the Puritans that came.
Isn't that amazing?
Here, right?
And when I read about these Puritans in England, they seemed so crazy. And I was like, oh, that's how we're founded. And we know somebody who just wrote a book talking about how America was basically founded by cults.
Oh, yeah, Jane Borden, yeah.
My husband's reading it right now. Yeah, it's great. So you started having the pamphleteers writing things.
Oh, right.
So John
there was
Stubbs,
a lot of gossip. This guy, the French guy, he was kind of ugly too. Apparently they described, maybe it was just propaganda, but they described him as ugly. So yeah, there were pamphlets that were against this marriage. And she claimed slander against a lot of people that talk shit about him. And she was really nasty. They were put in racks. and literally stretched. They put like iron spikes under fingernails. They had a thing called slitting of the nose.
That's mean.
This is fucked
That's
up.
Chinatown. They slit Jack Nicholson's nose.
That was
did, right.
Polanski's cameo.
Polanski's cameo. And look what he turned into.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Bad Roman.
So basically, you have the rise of the Puritans.
Yeah.
She has all this chaos around her. She's very vocal. People don't like that about her. But she also was cruel, like what she did in her leisure time. You said she enjoyed bear baiting.
Right, which sounds so horrible.
Tell me what that is.
Well, I mean, from what I could tell, and I think there's bear baiting in maybe one of the Shakespeare plays, but I think it's like tying a bear to a stake and then having dogs attack it and ultimately kill it. And she thought it was really funny when the bears like were bleeding. Like, I think people found it hilarious.
I have a story connected to that. I somehow got involved with a cockfighting society in Arkansas, knowing very little about it.
Through no fault of your own.
No, it was through a job.
Okay.
But anyway, I sort of hung out with these guys in this sort of trailer park. He met me at the base of the trailer park with it was maybe 10 in the morning, and he was drinking a tall boy as he picked me up, and he goes, "Sorry, I don't have any more to offer you." And I said, "I'm fine." But anyway, we talked about cockfighting, and he was showing me all these roosters, his pride and joy. And I go, "What happens when they lose?" And he goes, they're just parts.
Oh, boy. I think I once went to like Sunday school or something in a place where on the weekends they did cockfighting, and they would put like...
Sounds right.
What the fuck?
Right. And I think they put razor blades on
their spurs.
So
they have
like
spurs.
when they scratched each other, there'd be real damage.
It's like the knife slitting of the nose.
Yeah.
But the thing I don't understand, I can understand, you know, a bullfight is not too far away from bear baiting in terms of like, you know, cruelty or however you want to look at it. But the reaction to find it hilarious is very weird.
But the thing that's interesting here is we're really setting on the bear baiting, and we just kind of glossed over the racks and the like. You can stretch a guy, you can tar and feather him, and you can gut him,
kill priests,
and you can put things underneath their fingernails and burn them to death and kill priests. But you go after those bears, man.
Right.
So our racks, I think of racks as
the rack,
like a dungeon thing.
Exactly.
What are the things where you just sit there and your arms are out?
The blocks.
Oh, that's the stocks.
The stocks.
That was more of a shaming thing,
right? And people threw tomatoes.
Yeah,
at
the
you.
Puritans brought that over to America.
But the rack is.
But the
torture.
rack, I don't think it was a public thing because I think it was in the dungeons because they couldn't
That's
really
where I picture
move the apparatus to the public forum like a guillotine can be public.
Yeah.
But basically, you're on a rack. There's a wheel, and they just keep turning it.
Oh God.
And turning it.
And apparently, you did come out of it like a foot taller or something.
Well, I've just learned that I'm shrinking because I have a fractured F4 vertebrae.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the rack might be useful for me.
Can you still ride roller coasters?
Hey, I'm 5'5". I'm still a contender.
Right.
We'll talk in a couple years.
Yeah. So, okay, well, I think we've established some bad things she did. There are other things. She was a fan of Sir Francis Drake, who was a big explorer, but he basically, like, just robbed all these places.
He was a pirate.
He was a douchebag.
I don't think there's any nice explorers. Like, you couldn't be a nice explorer, right?
But we all were brought up thinking these guys did good things,
well,
right?
Yeah.
They all had syphilis and, like, spread that all over the place.
They came in to port, they fucked your women, they stole your jewels. Indigenous people, of course.
You kind of have to be willing to kill whoever you come across.
Exactly.
If those people don't want you.
And you probably will get killed too. There were some explorers that just went places. They said, this is our place, and then they got killed.
That's why the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
I mean, that's not based on good things. But you also said she was corrupt. You met her in a meeting. You had to bring her gifts.
Pay her play.
So, I mean, she really loved the trappings of the monarchy and took advantage of them.
She had like some illnesses for a while, but then she kind of lived longer than people expected. And in a strange way, apparently Henry VIII, he kind of became legendary over time. They forgot about the horrible things he did. And I think because of that also, and because she was kind of strong, she overcame the people who were doubters. And she did become kind of legendary herself. And I think that's kind of how we know her. Like, she was 64 and she had overcome all this stuff. And I think the Armada attacked England from Spain and they didn't win. People were like, all right, Queen Elizabeth is pretty awesome.
Yeah, the Armada was considered invincible, right? Like the Spanish Armada, like that was
Exactly.
like
They were supposedly the biggest army on the seas. But she did not marry. She didn't have children. And she did ultimately have Mary Stuart executed, so she got rid of that threat. But she didn't have a kid, so she didn't have a direct heir. But I think in her old age, she was particularly difficult with her staff and her people. And she continued to flirt with guys too, which people thought was really horrible to see this older woman fucking around with the men in her court.
It's kind of like Ruth Gordon in My Bodyguard.
Oh, right. I thought you were going to say, what was that movie with the guy that likes death?
Oh, Harold and Maude.
Harold and Maude. Was that Ruth Gordon?
That's a May December.
So any Ruth Gordon film after Rosemary's Baby.
But maybe the fact that Elizabeth did all this stuff, maybe there's a feminist aspect of it.
Well, that's the thing about it, because I'm looking at her legacy of that, like Queen Victoria.
Yeah.
I mean, the very fact that she was involved in the arts and wasn't threatened by them, but encouraged them. Yeah, she was terrible to people, but just you have to consider the context of the time and the circumstances of the time.
Right.
She got a lot done in her lifetime.
Totally. There was a lot of people are probably out to kill me, so if I don't kill them, it was kind of desperate times.
Exactly. I mean, I think she really set an interesting precedent and made way for queens like Victoria and, of course, Elizabeth II. Who was a beloved queen.
Yeah,
she grew into it. And Elizabeth II also became a very young queen coming off of World War II. And, having spent a lot of time in England, she was very beloved and very respected.
I think in a weird way, it's kind of a universal thing that, if you have longevity and you're a survivor, you kind of can gain respect just because you're surviving.
Yeah, I think we forget the rough edges.
I think that's kind of happened a little bit with Margaret Thatcher and I would almost put Ronald Reagan in that category.
Oh,
totally. And do you think Queen Elizabeth I gets points? I mean, she must have been an incredible influence on women in general of the time, seeing this role model. I mean, even though she killed people, maybe there was something positive about, she's just as badass as a guy. Her dad killed people and people didn't care.
I think we're always going to have to look at our battleisms through the lens of gender. Unfortunately, it will be. But I mean, if you look at someone like Martha Stewart,
right? There's
no doubt she's made her empire on her own. And she's very smart at making herself relevant. And I had the opportunity to work with her. And yes, she does put the fear of God in people. I'll tell you that much. When she walks through the building, she knows outside eye, is so-and-so in the office today? No, why is their light on? She can see everything. But at the same time, she's smart and she's sharp and she knows what she's doing. And therefore, you respect her. I think Queen Elizabeth I, I'd cut her some slack. I don't know how I'd behave in that situation. I don't think I'd be into the bear baiting. But had they had baseball, maybe she preferred that.
With the Shakespeare, was she in power throughout the time that Shakespeare was active?
Yeah, the Elizabethan, and I think she helped a lot of artists. So I think she gets huge point. We don't put enough of an emphasis on the arts in our country now. The British always have.
Well, I think every country outside of America respects the arts, whether it's Canada, England.
Luxembourg.
Luxembourg.
Sure. They must have good shows.
Well, anyway, they respect that we need the arts as part of our culture and it's part of our well-being as a community and as a culture.
And I wonder if the respect of theater, etc., in England, some of it must have come from Queen Elizabeth I, and he performed for her. Shakespeare did his plays, but that's awesome. And I think being queen, too, she could have gotten away with not being cultured and not being educated, and she clearly wanted to better herself.
So a bit of a trailblazer in a way.
Oh, totally.
To show some respect, yeah.
I think also there were people that were probably kings like Henry VIII that were just shitheads without redeeming qualities. And she was kind of a shithead, but then supported the arts.
Well, yeah, the other thing, you also think about this position, you inherit it just by your family. So you have no talent except to be born into this family. And there's a lot of inbreeding.
And to have a mother everyone called the Great Whore, and to come from that and overcome that stigma, that took a lot of skill.
I think she did the best she could, but at the dire expense of others.
And bears.
And bears.
So what do we think? Do we think she deserves the title bad, or is this a more qualified, nuanced bad?
I would go with the latter. I can't just say she's bad. I have to look at her and forgive her for the context of her time and situation.
And it's interesting that we're kind of living in a time where it's hard for people to look at that context, like with her forefathers, the country's forefathers, and all the shitty things some of them did.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. I can call her bad. She fucking murdered a lot of people.
She murdered a lot of priests, and I have to tell you, there's a lot of people today who would like a lot of priests murdered in the Catholic Church.
Absolutely. I'm not saying that she didn't do good. Are you Catholic? You were brought up Catholic.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from that perspective?
I remember talking to Stephen Colbert about this because he's also a practicing Catholic.
Oh, right.
And he just said you have to look at it as a giant ship and you got to scrape off the barnacles.
Oh, interesting.
Which the barnacles could be pedophilia.
Yeah.
But it's with any religion. You choose what works, what is right, and is a guide for you.
And there's always that thing where people are like, there's a difference between religion and faith.
Exactly. Getting back to it, I'll give her a pass.
Okay.
Yeah, the bear baiting is pretty bad. Yeah. And the killing of the priests and starving the people. And
yeah.
I think dangling, disemboweling that's an image.
Well, that's the other thing, too, which the Puritans brought over, was hang drawing and quartering people or putting them in the stockades and stuff like that. They brought over that violence.
Yeah, can you imagine packing a fucking ship to go across the Atlantic Ocean and be like, oh, make sure we bring the
stockades.
Right. When I go on vacation, I always forget that. But it won't go in your overhead bag.
I'm lucky if I remember a toothbrush.
Right.
I mean, history softens everything.
Yeah.
She had to be the one to be a monarch, a female monarch that was taken seriously. Joining us now is English historian, best-selling author and broadcaster Alice Loxton, a.k.a. History Alice. She's written many books, including her most recent one, 18, A History of Britain in 18 Young Lives, which was a Sunday Times bestseller and was named Blackwell's Book of the Year in 2024. We are thrilled to have her here to talk to us about the Virgin Queen.
Thank you for being here, Alice.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting.
So let's talk about Queen Elizabeth I. We'll start with some of her strong suits. I mean, one thing that probably helped her out a lot was she was very steady. She ruled for 44 years, which is 11 U.S. presidential terms. So it's a long time. And that stood out also, I bet, because her predecessors were not steady and did not have longevity, right?
That's right, yeah. I mean, the first thing to say is, in the UK, we always say Elizabeth I. Elizabeth
I'm sorry.
I.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that's an American thing, I guess. But Elizabeth I is such a funny way to talk about it.
It's just an odd quirk by me, but I'll call her Elizabeth I from now on.
Well, whatever you like, I think that's fine. I think she wouldn't mind because, of course, her big thing, as you say, was that she went for a middle way where she tried to, or this is how it goes, how we often talk about her, is that she tried to strike this middle ground, this middle way after the kind of upheaval of the reigns of her half-siblings, which was Edward VI, who favoured the Protestant belief, and then and Mary I after that, who favoured the Catholic belief. And because we were kind of, going either side of those kind of extremes, it was a lot of upheaval in those years following the Reformation. These are all the children of Henry VIII. And what's so amazing about Elizabeth is that she has this incredibly unstable childhood where it's against the odds in many ways that she's going to become queen, let alone be alive by the time she's in her 20s. And yet she does, because she does get to that point. What I always think about, you were talking before about my book 18, where I basically look at young lives of people throughout history. And I always think about Elizabeth I. If you took an 18-year-old Elizabeth I and you put her on a therapist's couch, right, where are we going to start? Because it would be a lot to talk about. She had this incredibly disrupted childhood. Her mother was executed, Anne Boleyn, when she was a toddler. She had 4 stepmothers that came and went. Her father died, Henry VIII. And then she was faced with the half-siblings, Edward and Mary.
So she had all these half-siblings that became queen or king before her. And I know Edward VI was 9 years old when he took office, and he had tuberculosis and died. And then Mary was only in office for 5 years. She was pretty sickly too. So that was kind of crazy. Why did they take over before she had a chance to take over?
Edward was, of course, he was the brother, and though he was younger than Mary and Elizabeth, he was a boy, and so he inherited before the girls.
Right.
And then Mary the First was the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, so she was the oldest half-sibling of Elizabeth. So Elizabeth was at the bottom of the pecking order, and that's why she's interesting, because she probably never believed or never hoped to dare to believe that she might become queen. And then the fact that she has this 4-decade reign, which is known to lots of British people as, Gloriana, this golden age. It would have been impossible for her to believe that she would have been so successful, and she would go down in history as one of our greatest monarchs. So I expect she'd be pretty surprised to know what would happen in the years to come.
I mean, not only was she at the bottom of the pecking order, but her mom was really maligned, Anne Boleyn. I guess during that age when you had parents that were maligned, it rubbed off on you.
Sure, yeah. So basically, Elizabeth's parents were Henry VIII, who was the King of England, and Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn was a detested woman for many people because Henry VIII divorced his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. It was a classic, midlife crisis, He's had this wonderful wife for many, many years, and she's been totally dedicated, totally loyal. And then suddenly young Anne Boleyn comes along, who's beautiful and kind of sexy and flirtatious, and Henry just can't resist it. It's a classic story. And he throws everything out the window. He throws his wife. He literally separates from the church in Rome, and he rewrites what England's religion is going to be just so he can jump into bed with Anne Boleyn, essentially. And so that's why people so resent Anne Boleyn. And the whole argument for Anne Boleyn coming along for Henry was that she would deliver him the much longed for male heir. I have a lot of sympathy for Anne Boleyn that she didn't deliver the heir. That's just the random kind of bad luck, I suppose, that actually she gave birth to a girl, Elizabeth. And so because of this, from the moment she's born, a lot of people detest her and resent her. And then she has this interesting thing when she's growing up where, okay, she is the daughter of Henry VIII, and that's a great thing, and that's her pedigree and everything. But she's also fighting being the daughter of Anne Boleyn. And I guess the way to compare it is imagine if there was a really detested celebrity or someone that, were always in the tabloids and people hated, and that was your mother. You'd always be unsure whether to connect to them or not. To give an example, when Anne Boleyn moved on and Henry executed her, he'd redecorated the palaces where he'd put the initials H.A., so Henry and Anne, all over the royal palaces. And then these were literally chipped off. Oh,
it's like getting a tattoo of your girlfriend, and then you have to figure out how to turn it into a bird or something, right?
Yeah.
Johnny Depp, it's Wino Forever.
Oh, right. Winona Ryder.
Yeah.
Became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Has that ever happened to you, Kathy, with a
tattoo?
With an old boyfriend?
No. I never, no. I wouldn't even get monogrammed anything.
Right.
Life is temporary, man. Keep moving.
It's true. You have to be careful. That's fascinating. And what was the deal with Lady Jane Grey?
Oh.
Not to get too in the weeds.
Yeah, okay. So the whole thing in this period is religion is a huge thing, right? This is just after the Reformation. Henry VIII divorces Catherine of Aragon so that he can marry Anne Boleyn. And to do this, he has to split from the Catholic Church in Rome. And so they set up the new Church of England. He's head of the Church of England. And then that basically creates these two tribes in England, those who favour the old Catholic religion and those who favour the new Church of England. They're both Christian, but they're these different types of Christianity. It's such a divisive thing throughout the whole 16th century. And so when Edward VI dies as a child, basically there's this other young girl, Lady Jane Grey, who's another kind of pawn in this power game. Basically, they try and shoehorn her in to become queen because she is of the Protestant faith rather than the Catholic faith. And she eventually is executed. And that's a terrible, sad story. So, it's all sad and it's all tragic. It's like if you had a TV reality show, it would be the worst, most tragic, depressing kind of fallout of all of that. And so when we talk about the reign of Elizabeth I and the fact she ruled for over 4 decades, it's an amazingly stable kind of succession of events in lots of ways when you see what was happening before her.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And you brought up, I mean, Gideon and I were just speaking about this before the interview, is that, she had this reign of 40 years, which also was sort of a reign of arts, celebration, and enlightenment. She also welcomed Shakespeare into the zeitgeist, so to speak.
That's it. I mean, in general, when people talk about Elizabeth I, and she was queen from 1558 to 1603, they talk about it as a golden age of culture, of exploring the world. I mean, that's the traditional view of Elizabeth's reign. It's this real flourishing of culture. They call it a kind of golden age of arts and literature. And of course, the hero of all of it was William Shakespeare, and he grew up during the reign of Elizabeth I. So that is a big legacy. But, there's a lot of things that are strengths in Elizabeth's reign. She was a strong leader in her own right. I mean, she makes some pretty amazing speeches. There's this one speech where she says, "I have the heart and stomach of a king." And that's when she's referencing her father, Henry VIII.
Who's famous for the turkey legs.
Yeah. Yes.
How much autonomy did Elizabeth have as the queen?
Well, Elizabeth, she had a kind of group of advisors, I suppose, but she was unusual for her day in that she was highly educated. She was very intelligent, and she really understood the dangers of court politics. So she understood how to, I think one of the most important skills perhaps of the time was that she knew how to navigate the diplomacy of court, the dealing with these powerful players. And I think she knew how to do that because she'd learned it in her youth. I think she'd be a really good lawyer today. She was that really precise.
A good divorce lawyer.
Yeah. Definitely a good divorce lawyer.
Like a New York divorce lawyer.
Yeah. She'd be like really hard-nosed, and she'd be really good at detail, I think. But also she'd hold her nerve. Just imagine Elizabeth, and imagine her with a room of men who are trying to bring her down, and these are powerful guys, and they got big teams behind them, and she would just sit there and hold her nerve. And I think that's where she was pretty effective. There are a lot of kind of high moments in her reign. The Spanish Armada, she overcame the Spanish Armada, which was a huge threat at the time. I mean, the big thing about Elizabeth's reign is that she never married, right? That's the big thing. And for years and years, they were in discussions about who she's going to marry. But the problem is, of course, because she's a woman, it kind of is at odds with her position as queen to be the wife of another man who is in charge is kind of disrupted there. That's something she's always kind of pushing back on. And eventually she never marries, and she doesn't have any children. And that's compared to her father's reign, Henry VIII, who spends his whole life trying to push for an heir, is quite a strikingly different approach.
Do you think she didn't want to get married? Or do you think that was like a PR move where she deliberately just didn't do it to help her image?
Well, look, if you have been brought up and when you were a toddler, your mother had been executed by your father, and then you'd seen 4 stepmothers come and go, and then you'd seen the 6th wife of your father, who you thought to be a kind of mother figure, get married to a man who you thought to be a father figure. This is a man called Thomas Seymour, who then makes a move on you. And Elizabeth gets embroiled as a teenage girl in this thing called the Seymour affair. It's basically this kind of stepfather figure making a move on her. It was a terrible episode in her life. If you just think of all of those things sort of happened before she was age 18, do you think it's surprising she never got married? Is that a good example for marriage?
That's a fair point.
She didn't have a lookbook for her wedding gown or anything like that.
Right.
There wasn't a good example of marriage, I don't think, for her to aspire to from her childhood. Having said that, she definitely had lovers throughout her life. Or sorry, I didn't say that she definitely did, but, there are definitely people that we suspect might have been lovers.
Right.
For example, Robert Dudley, who was a great friend of hers. Maybe something more.
Well, now that you bring him up,
yeah,
I have kind of read that she was flirting with him a lot in public. I mean, I think he was maybe in her bedroom at times. I guess they weren't caught in the act or anything, but it seems like the title of Virgin Queen is probably just a title. Anyway, I did want to bring up some of the things that maybe people would see as negatives.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I did read, and again, I think nothing is proven, but Robert Dudley, who was potentially a lover of hers, his wife, Lady Amy, was found dead at the bottom of a flight of stairs. And I guess a bunch of the people in England at the time were like, he killed her because he wanted to become king. And he wanted to be with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth must have been in on the plan. I don't know. Do you know anything about this whole thing?
Yeah, so it's pretty sus, I think, but it's hard to tell. So basically, Robert Dudley is this great favourite of Queen Elizabeth. There is no hard evidence that they were physically lovers, if you like, but she often writes and talks about him as someone who she's very close to. There are quotes like, "Nothing unseemly ever passed between them." She would swear that that was the case. She once said, "I cannot do without my Lord Robert, for he is like my little dog." So there's all these kind of quotes, and I think it's without a doubt that she's very, very, very fond of him. And they're often hanging out together and they're often like gossiping with each other and everything. We'll probably never know. There was a kind of suspicious moment when Robert Dudley's wife, Amy, fell down the stairs and died. And she was found at the bottom of the stairs with a broken neck in the year 1560. The question is, did somebody push her? Was it suicide? Was it disease? Was it accident? All of these different things. It was such a cloud of suspicion, even at the time, that it made it very difficult for Elizabeth, had she wanted to have accepted him, not able to accept him, because it might look like she was complicit in Amy's death.
Walking downstairs wearing those corsets, wearing those outfits to begin with was always a risk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it always amazes me. Like, how did you get around?
Yeah.
Like when you look at pictures of the Virgin Queen and those high collars and all that stuff, it just feels like, how did she even breathe?
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth I is notorious for her wardrobe. The most extravagant dresses, weighed down with jewels, dripping with pearls. Today, she would be on the covers of magazines. She would be written about, scandalous stories of her being totally extravagant. I think Met Gala level kind of extravagance.
Like every day.
At her death, there were over 2,000 gowns recorded in her wardrobe.
Is that a negative thing that could be said about her? I mean, from some perspective, that like she spent so much of that royal money, on herself. She
was amazing, I think, at PR. Right? She created an image of herself, this image of Gloriana, this image of the Virgin Queen. So the idea of the Virgin Queen is that she is eternally youthful. So even though she's older, a middle-aged woman, she will have portraits painted of her as if she looks, say, 20.
Of course, it's what people put on dating apps for their
right.
pictures and what they put on their Facebook. Everything is curated.
It is very social media.
Growing to have more and more sympathy with her, particularly when you say they have 2,000 gowns on her deathbed. Yeah, there's actresses right now that have air-conditioned regulated storage spaces that house
she
that
would have
stuff.
had that. She'd have had all the more cons.
Exactly.
She'd have done, what's it called when you, "Hey AD, welcome to my house," like the most epic display of dresses and clothing ever.
Look at my crib.
Yeah.
My bed is short, but people weren't tall in my day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the more that you're sort of explaining, like the other thing too is like she was raised in such a culture of evil, so to speak, and that her father was like, "Women are disposable to me." When you're born and taught nasty, that's what you know.
The day that she was born, there were all of these celebrations prepared for the birth of a royal prince, right? There was so much pressure on it. And when it was announced that this was a girl, it was a huge disappointment, All of these celebrations were cancelled.
That happened. Yeah.
There are records of things like it was a terrible mood at court. I mean, you can imagine it. Like, that was the moment that she entered the world. She was a disappointment. I don't know what kind of insecurity it must put into you from a very early stage.
Gosh, yeah.
But, it was very difficult. She was the second queen regnant, so the second queen who ruled in her own right. The first one being her half-sister, Mary I, who hadn't ruled for that long. So when she has this 4-decade-long reign as a woman, it is the first time this has ever happened in England. So she really is pioneering this role, and she is the first to ever do it. So I think it's not surprising that PR was an important thing for her, and that she really curated an image. Because she never married, she had to present herself as strong enough as a woman on her own. And so she really plays into these strengths of being a woman. So that might be virginity, or it might be purity, or all of these kind of tropes that were around at the time.
Beautiful dresses.
Exactly.
It was also difficult that Catholics and Protestants were up in arms against one another. And I know that when Mary Bloody Mary. When she was queen, there were all these death threats against her. And Queen Elizabeth, whether it was a necessity or not, did end up killing a lot of Catholic priests, a lot of Catholic citizens. And, I don't know if it's fair to judge kings and queens for bad acts when that is almost part of the job. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Elizabeth, she basically inherited, the situation was very difficult. The country was split. And if things had gone wrong, civil war might have broken out. And that was a very real threat, I'm sure, at the time. And her half-siblings, like Mary I, had resorted to terrible punishments, burning people at the stake, that sort of thing, to bat off civil unrest. And so Elizabeth is in a very difficult position. She's very insecure throughout her life, I think. There was a biography of her recently that was Elizabeth I, A Study in Insecurity. That's quite interesting that they chose to talk about that. She has these advisors like William Cecil and Francis Walsingham, and they are basically spy catchers, and they are this kind of secret service network because there are these spies everywhere plotting against her all the time. And these are largely Catholic plots. The biggest focus of all of this is her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, you might have heard of. And so this is another important aspect of Elizabeth's life, is that she has this cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, who is her heir. It's so interesting, these two women who, in another world, might have been friends, but they are kind of pitted against each other because they're opposing views. Eventually, it gets so difficult that Elizabeth orders the execution of Mary. She signs the death warrant and Mary's executed in 1587. Now, maybe that seems a heartless thing to do, to execute your cousin. But, there were years and years of hesitation, and she tried to avoid executing Mary, but she couldn't really get around it because Mary had been found to plot against her and plot Elizabeth's death. So she was in a very difficult situation, Elizabeth, and it was probably a case of if she didn't take that hard line, then someone else would have assassinated her or, taken her down.
Kathy, you were Catholic, right? Brought up Catholic?
Yes, I am.
What do you think of Queen Elizabeth, raining terror down on Catholics?
Every sort of religion has been persecuted over the years, so it doesn't really matter
and
to me.
They persecute one another.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I mean, I think I have more respect for her to, the way that Alice is unpacking. Imagine this is what you're born into.
Right.
Jesus Christ. I mean, wow.
I mean, society was set up, this royal structure was set up where whenever there were two heirs alive at the same time, it's inevitable that they're going to want to kill each other, right?
It's like Blake Lively and Taylor Swift. Are they friends? Are they not friends?
It's like that.
And the reason why they are friends is because they both live in that sort of spectacular circle of being very wealthy and being very they get along because they both can afford to go shopping at Chanel spontaneously.
Yeah.
I don't want to belittle that because they both are very talented. But I mean, we can obviously compare our sort of tabloid figures to the monarchs of yesterday.
I think that's definitely fair. Yeah.
Well, she also she would cut off the arms of publishers that wrote bad things about her, right?
I mean, I think one thing to say, and we were talking about, her suppressing Catholics before, but she also suppressed the Puritan threat. So there were these two threats, Puritan and Catholic, and it's called the middle way. So she does try and basically strike this middle way. And there's this amazing quote that goes something like, "It is not my role to look into men's souls," which is basically her saying, faith is something that's your personal thing, and I don't want to be the person that tells you what your soul should be thinking or believing. So I think she is a rational person. I think she is diplomatic. She's very good at, striking that middle ground, but also recognizing the threats of assassination, the threats of civil war, the threats of things breaking down. And I think considering the incredibly difficult circumstances of what she was given, and the fact that she was the first woman to be reigning for that long ever, and that she would have spent her whole time in rooms of men who probably doubted her and didn't think that she was going to get that far, and probably would try to arrange another prince to kind of marry her, to keep her on the straight and narrow, that sort of thing. I think she did amazingly well. And I think with history, the way to think about it, it's always easy to look at these people as characters from the past. where we know their story and we already know that they're around for 4 decades. But actually, if you just consider that what their actual position was as a person and try and imagine what it was like for her as a person, not knowing what was coming and not knowing the future, I think she did very well. What she had was a task that I would never want to have. And I think the fact that she was queen for all those years is testament to her talent at managing all of that.
Yes, so she had some bad acts, but they were almost understandable given what was going on.
You know, the other thing with history is you can't start to make head or tail of anyone unless you think about the context of their world. It was normal for people to be treated cruelly. Those enemies of the state would be executed. I mean, Elizabeth's mother was executed by her father.
Right.
Like, just even that is enough.
You can't lose sight of that.
Yeah.
Yes, once you've crossed that line, you can expect anything. And the other thing, too, is you have to think at that time, like, torture was a form of sport,
Right. They would come with towels and they'd sop up the blood after, like, people were executed.
Well, in 50 years after Elizabeth's death, Charles I was executed, the king, and civil war did break out. So it's not like these were distant things that were, maybe it would one day happen. These things were really happening. And so there was a serious threat.
Yeah, we imagined she woke up with breakfast in bed every morning, but was the breakfast poisoned? You know what I mean? Like, she was always on edge.
Yeah. Or was her dress poisoned?
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Her dress is being poisoned and it would suffocate you. So
Crazy.
I think you just be insecure and worried.
Or on edge, yes.
Basically, you could never, ever relax.
Exactly.
Ever.
Oh, I forgot about bear baiting.
Yeah.
She was a huge fan of that. That's pretty mean. Okay.
But they didn't have cable.
I know, true. No Comedy Central.
There's no Comedy Central now.
There was no TikTok.
Yeah, no TikTok.
So yeah, let's talk about bear baiting.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a time when there's terrible, cruel sports, blood sports is what they call it. Bear baiting's a horrible one, kind of animal cruelty written all over it. But people of all standing in society enjoyed these sports, and they enjoyed them not long after Elizabeth I was around. Cockfighting as well. That was the normal at the time. And I think you have to think with history that we always think we know that this stuff's wrong because it's in the past. But there are things that we are doing right now that in 100 years' time, people will be like, I cannot believe that they thought that was okay. How did they go about their day-to-day thinking that wasn't really, really cruel? I don't know what it is yet. It will be something.
I know, it's making me nervous.
I know.
Well, NFL football,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting what we react to. And I think it's a good point. 100 years from now, they look at us and be like, you inhumane bastards,
Yeah.
It's an interesting lens.
To give an example of that, like the obvious example, I think, is, we often think that the transatlantic slave trade, it doesn't exist anymore as it did in the 1700s. And we think, at least in Britain, we think, oh, that is something that's from the past. But what will historians think in 200 years' time? They'll probably look at the 21st century Britain, the year 2025, and think, I can't believe all of those people were wearing clothes made by people in sweatshops in other parts of the world, or supporting some kind of terrible labour. Yet we go around day to day wearing this really cheap clothing, and we never probably really think about where it's from. So we shouldn't judge the past too harshly, I think, because that was the normal, and there are other normals today which will one day not be seen as normal.
We become enlightened very slowly in the arc of history.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Alice, for joining us and talking about Queen Elizabeth. We've learned so much, and I have to say I have more of a soft spot for her now.
Oh, I definitely do.
It's always interesting to hear like an American perspective on these events, because we always brought up with this as like a childhood story, So did you have a perception that she was like a bad figure from history?
No, I don't think that she was bad. I think she's remarkable, but I think we're a little biased too, because our duty on this podcast series is to find bad things. So we were kind of harping a little bit on the negatives without like exploring a lot of the amazing things about her.
Well, no, it's definitely the right way to do it, because she has for years, I don't know, when I say years, I mean centuries, been described as like the glorious Queen Elizabeth I, Gloriana, the great queen. But actually, it's a new thing now in the last 50 years, say, people have said, actually, it wasn't a glorious reign. When she died, there was a lot of poverty. It was a lot of people suffering. And, if you look at the Armada, which is in 1588, which was this great triumph in English history, people always talk about it like the time that we overcame the Spanish and all these Spanish ships were driven away. They couldn't hack the terrible English weather, all of this kind of stuff, which we're very proud of. But actually, the soldiers from that, lots of them, instead of being these heroes, they were treated badly, or they were, suffered in poverty. And actually, so towards the end of her reign, there were a lot of kind of problems like that. So it's a very valid thing to question that she was this great queen. There's definitely many sides to that coin.
Yeah, I think we look at it, we have to think about the context of the times and what a monarchy meant then versus what it means today. And she actually was effective, and now we look at monarchies across the world and we're just like, well, they're figureheads and they get paid well for sitting around.
Yeah.
It's a very simplistic view of looking at things, because I was actually a great fan of Elizabeth II.
Right.
Well, I think a good way to think about these figures from history is to try and get them out of the context of their time and be like,
exactly,
what would they be like if they were alive today, and which person would they be?
Yeah.
Like, where would they sit in today's society, and what role would they play? And that's sometimes helpful, I think.
Yeah. And I think looking at her and the way that you've unpacked it, it's important to show her respect.
Yes, whether you like her or not.
Yeah.
Even though she did some awful things.
People are still dissecting it a lot. Historians debate this a lot. So it's definitely not hard and fast.
No, I'm still dissecting what I did yesterday,
Right.
Same.
Of course, it's very easy to be a judge. But this has been incredibly enlightening. And gosh, we could talk about the royals for hours and just British history as well. But love your writing. Thank you for joining us. This has been so much fun. And we hope to, as we go into further seasons of Bad, perhaps there's other names that will come up that you might be able to weigh in on.
I'd love to. Well, I'd love to come back. It's been great fun to be on it. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And what's your book coming up, if you don't mind?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is another great queen. Or the question is she a great queen? Because she does have some major kind of black marks to her name. But she's this queen called Eleanor Castile. And she was in the medieval period. And she was formidable. I think today she'd be like a CEO kind of type, she'd be like a powerhouse. We have a show in Britain called Dragon's Den. I don't know if you have that in America where...
No.
So she would be one of those dragons. So like formidable. I don't know if she was always that kind, but interesting nonetheless. And basically I went on this 200-mile walk to trace her life.
Oh, wow.
So that's coming out soon.
You do the work.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating.
She was married to Edward I, who, if anyone's ever seen Braveheart, he's the baddie king in that. Although he wasn't actually necessarily a baddie. I don't know. People might have seen that. But again, more people to unpack, of course.
And label bad.
Yeah.
Or good.
Well, that's the question.
Thanks so much to our guest, Alice Loxton, who tutored us on the Tudors. If you want more information on Elizabeth I, you can find that in our show notes.
Thank you for listening to Bad Elizabeth. Please rate and review the show on places like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We are Bad Elizabeth Pod on Instagram and Substack.
We really want this podcast to be a conversation with our listeners. Feel free to email us at badelizabethpod@gmail.com if you have any questions or comments. They can be good or bad. Just don't be indifferent.
Bad Elizabeth is recorded at Jett Road Studios. It is hosted by me, Gideon Evans.
And me, Kathy Egan-Taylor. It is produced and engineered by Will Becton, and our executive producer is Amber Becton.
Our theme music was composed by Alexis Guardado and Danny Gray. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time.